Have you changed your religion? Did you look into your faith and decided it wasn't for you? Well, if so, you'll be interested to hear from the writer, Saif Rahman. He's the founder of the Humanist and Cultural Association. He was born a Muslim, but when he got older, he did his research and decided it just wasn't for him. Is there anything you'd like to ask him? Is there anything you'd like to say about your own journey through faith, from one faith to another? We'll be talking all about that after the news with Chetan Pathak.
BBC Asian Network News.
Have you ever questioned the religion you were born into? Is it possible to follow the culture of a religion without believing in God or the creator of that religion? Can you be culturally Hindu, culturally Sikh, culturally Muslim, while not necessarily really being into it? Does that describe you? If you're listening now to BBC Asian Network and you come from a Hindu, Sikh, Muslim, Buddhist, Jain family, but you're not really into it, you turn up at the events, you go because your parents want you to go, get in contact with me. Or do you think you're either in or you're out? After further looking into the religion you were born into, have you ever thought, I love the culture and the way of life, I just don't really believe in the teachings? And can you cherry pick what you like and don't like? Cut and paste. My next guest was born a Muslim but decided the religious side of it just wasn't for him. Saif Rahman has written a book and is the founder of the Humanist and Cultural Association. Saif, welcome to the show.
Hi, Nihal.
First of all, tell us about your upbringing.
Well, I was brought up in a traditional Muslim household. My parents came here and they brought me up as a devout Muslim. I used to pray 5 times a day and used to follow all the festivities. And yeah, it was great. I just used to, in the back of my head, always used to have certain questions about things that I was being taught, which were in conflict with the world around me at the time.
Okay. So, how old were you when you decided this wasn't for me?
It's quite a blurry period because I used to pray, like I say, 5 times a day when I was in my teenage years. But while I was stood on the Janamaz, I used to sit there and think of all sorts of worldly questions. I mean, like, why are people starving? Why does God do X, Y, and Z? Why does it say certain things about homosexuals, certain things against apostates? And I used to have all of these thoughts I used to try to drown out of my head while I was actually praying. And in doing so, I mean, we traditionally taught that it's the shaitan who's putting these evil thoughts in our head. So we are taught to try to eliminate those thoughts and continue with what we have been taught. And so that led me to investigating the truth for myself.
Right, okay. And, well, that's fascinating. There are, of course, lots of parts of religious books which people do choose to believe or not believe. There are many people who believe that you shouldn't cut off the hands of thieves. They carry on. They take the bits that give them strength. Why couldn't you disassociate the apostate thing, for instance, from just the general living?
Well, I think it was part of being honest with myself. The first part of the journey was to evaluate whether it was the truth. If it was the truth, then it was something that I felt I ought to devote myself wholeheartedly towards, because obviously I wanted to find myself in heaven as opposed to frying in hell. And so, there was that fundamental question that led me to, read the Quran in its various translations and read the various hadith and come to my own opinion. Because obviously it's something that you need to objectively evaluate rather than follow the tales and things that you've been taught by various different elders who often have different interpretations themselves.
Yes, quite. We had that discussion yesterday with 2 imams on this very show who couldn't agree on a number of things.
And you're often told to go and speak to a scholar if you've got questions, but as you say, then the scholars themselves have fundamental disagreements on the very essence of questions like what is God and what does he expect of you?
Well, we had a fundamental disagreement on whether taking an asthmatic inhaler broke your fast or not. That's the kind of fundamental disagreement we had between two imams yesterday.
And if you ask them, can you put alcohol in perfume? That's another one that will set the cat amongst the pigeons.
But that's no different to many religions, is it? I mean, no religion has a kind of homogenous, overriding set of principles that everyone believes in. There is always, with Islam, of course, there's Sunnis and Shias, and then with the Christianity, there's Protestants and there's Catholics, and there's all kinds of denominations going on there. So this happens in all religions, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it does happen to some extent in all religions. I think Islam is slightly different from the other religions in that the Quran is literally meant to be the words of God. So there's less flexibility on interpretation once you've got the literal translation in front of you, and that's what a lot of the Salafis and Wahhabis would have you believe.
Right. Okay. Now you mentioned Salafis and Wahhabis. Is that what put you off Islam?
I think it's the thing that...
because many British Muslims regard those Salafis and Wahhabis to be extreme.
I think I was caught between the two. I think there were certain things that they were saying that, you could back up with Scripture itself. But
you could back up with an interpretation of Scripture.
You could. It depends on how willing you're.
If you're willing to take the historical context out of why some of the things were said in the first place,
and how metaphorically you're willing to interpret those words.
Right.
In the language that the Quran is written in, I think it's fairly clear cut. But it's up to each individual to independently evaluate.
But what I suppose I can't understand is, of course, if you were presented with a very austere, extreme form of Islam, perhaps as someone who is moderate at your core, you would decide, well, this is not for me. But to reject the entire religion based on its interpretation by people who, and let's face it, Wahhabism is 200 years old, if that.
Yeah.
So it's a relatively modern strain of Islam. To reject Islam based on extremes seems an extreme in itself, rather than doing what the majority of Muslims do, which is they're a Sunni or they're a Shia and they get on with their lives and they just do it normally.
I think you could say that it's 200 years old, but then Islam, came around 700 BC and it was 1400 years old.
700 AD, yeah, not BC.
Sorry, 700 AD.
Yeah. And
during that period, it went through the Crusades and it went through, its own growth throughout the world.
Yes. It had to fight to survive, didn't it?
Yeah, and so you've got to really look at, what is Islam in its essence, and
isn't it love, peacefulness?
I think yes. I think a lot of it is. I think it's got
humanity, zakat.
It's got everything in there. But there's also some verses there that are equally contentious. And when you go about evaluating, objectively analysing, I think the most important thing to the individual is this written by God himself? Because if it is, then you need to spend a lot more time devoting yourself to following its tenets. If not, then take the good bits, like you say, and take the good bits from all cultures, all religions, all beliefs, and try to make yourself as good a person as possible.
Okay. Stay with us, Saif. If there's anything you'd like to ask Saif or anything you'd like to say to him, then 81869 is the text number, or you can speak directly to him on 08459 440 445. If these are similar feelings that you've had, regardless of the religion, whether it be Sikhism, Hinduism or Islam, then do get in contact with us and tell us. Or indeed, if you were born a Christian and you decided it's not for me, or perhaps if you embraced Christianity or a different religion other than the one you were born into, I'd like to hear from you as well. Shay in Leicester. Good morning, Shay.
Morning.
Now, your mother is a Jain, is that right?
Yes.
And would you class yourself as a Jain?
No, I wouldn't.
Why not?
I don't believe in it. I find certain things contradicting, if you want to put it that way. But yeah, certain things, okay, yes, I believe non-violence, etc. Okay, but the things where they say, okay, all living things should be unharmed, unseen or seen. Okay? I don't believe in that. Because, you know, you have events where, okay, you're not allowed the fans inside the hall because they kill germs. But yet you're walking, you're sitting, you're clapping, you're singing. What are you doing then? You're killing germs. So,
wow.
That ways, if I look at it, yeah, I don't believe in it to that extent.
And how did your mother take it when you said, this is not for me?
She was okay with it. I mean, I've had arguments and arguments with her on this. And, you know, she's like, yeah, okay, fine, correct, but don't look so much into it. I said, although I'm not looking into it, people from the caste are looking into it. People from the religion are looking into it. They're bringing this up as a problem. I said, you know, one way you're saying don't do this, but yet you're doing all this. I said, I don't understand it. And she's like, okay, fine. She's all right with it, that I don't believe in it. I mean, we've never stopped her from believing in it, so she believes in it to how much she wants to believe in it.
And do you have children?
I have my own faith. No, I don't.
Right, I see. And do you have nieces or nephews?
If I did, yes, I do.
And are they being brought up as Janes?
Yes, some of them have, but still, the faith is that if you've got faith in God, then go for that. If you don't have faith in the religion you are, then that's fine with us. It's what your faith lies in. I believe in something totally different to what my mom does, and that's fine with her. I have my own little temple in my room. She has her own temple. That's fine with us.
Okay. All right, Shay, thank you very much indeed. Saif, this would be, of course, the most interesting point about this is, well, there's several interesting points about this, but the most painful one I can imagine was having this conversation with your family, especially as they are devout Muslims, and apostasy is a pretty dire situation to be in, isn't it?
Well, it was very awkward, and it was one of those things that I tried to keep under wraps for a long, long time.
I bet.
Because, you know, you suffer a lot of social exclusion. Your parents feel like they've failed in some sense. They feel like, you know, you may have been possessed by the shaitan. You know, there are, and you know, ex-Muslims often have a lot of stories to tell about what has happened to them during that period. But I tried to keep fairly honest with my family during my transition, and used to throw all the questions to them, the ones that I was having myself.
Such as? Can you remember?
Yeah, for example, persecuting homosexuals.
But how many Muslims on the streets of Britain go around persecuting homosexuals?
They don't, but you know, a lot of people.
So what's the issue?
A lot of people with the traditional interpretation of Islam do suffer from homophobia, and I've seen it. And a lot of the time, people will won't necessarily overtly state it, but they all are aware it's not something.
I'm sure there are atheists who are homophobic as well. They don't have a monopoly on liberalism, do they?
No, but I think it's one of those things that if you read certain verses, that you may, you know, you can find justification to Allah Himself having a problem and seeing it as a perversion. And if you have a generation of people growing up with those kind of teachings, you'll find that there's a greater degree of homophobia within certain communities, and that's sad.
Yeah.
And you know, there's no reason.
But attacks on, for instance, attacks on gay men, for instance, or indeed gay women, I've yet to hear of a story of it being based on religion. Rather, it based on a couple of drunk thugs beating up a gay man or beating up a gay woman. I've yet to come across, I may be wrong, please point me in the direction of one, but I'm yet to come across a story whereby a Muslim or a Hindu or a Sikh or a Christian has beaten up a gay person.
It doesn't tend to happen so much here in the UK.
But that's where you live.
Yeah, but the question isn't whether how certain people behave in the UK. The question for me was the religion in itself.
Right. So you felt that you couldn't be part of a religion that allowed people to think of homosexuals in a certain way, and that way being a negative one.
And that amongst various other things like female equality, it's general.
Wasn't the Quran the first religious book to actually enshrine the rights of women?
I mean,
will certainly be very specific about the women's rights. I mean, there is an argument that culture, not the religion, led to a bias against women.
Yeah, I mean,
and the Punjabi Sikh community, as we've done phone-ins about this before, have an issue with, for instance, in the Punjab, a huge disparity between male and female births based on female infanticide in Punjab and Haryana. It's a big problem. So.
Yeah, I mean, there is that case to be made, but there are, various verses and various hadith that suggest otherwise. You've got things like the verse 434, which talks about it being okay to beat women under certain circumstances.
Even that's been explained. I mean, you have a point in the sense that a charity had to be set up in Scotland to advise Muslim men that Quranically it was not acceptable for them to beat their wives,
and marrying up to 4 women. So there is a certain.
But again, based on the context of men or women being widowed at time of war, so the historical context was that. As far as I've been led to believe, but please correct me if I'm wrong, you were, after all, born a Muslim, I wasn't.
The Prophet himself didn't just marry widows. He had up to nine wives, and they weren't all of them weren't widows. But conversely,
I'm not aware of the specifics of the Prophet. Someone else, perhaps. Well, you've made your point clear, and if someone else wants to disagree with that, they're more than welcome to do so. But yeah, I mean, you of course had great issues with Islam, and then you decided to tell your parents that you were going to say, look, it's just not for me.
Yeah, I mean, it was something that I had to approach very carefully. I did.
Over how long?
I'd say about 5-6 years.
5-6 years?
Yeah.
So how did you begin that process then?
I think initially, like I said, I started with all of my various doubts, but it was only until my cousin, who used to come over from Pakistan regularly, used to bring up the whole debate, and often we'd go debate until 4 o'clock in the morning about the virtues and various points in Islam. And at this stage, I was really researching it, and I had a long argument with him, and it went through the night, like I say, and at the end of it, he couldn't really come up with a lot of the answers, so he said, you've got 2 choices. Either you believe in Islam or you don't. You either believe the teachings that are there, that are quite clear in the Quran, or you don't believe it's from a God, and therefore you don't follow it. And he sort of put me, he put the question to me: you either are or you aren't. So what are you? And at that point, it was a straw that broke the camel's back for me. So there was a single point at which I just said, okay, I'm no longer a Muslim. And his face visibly registered a shock, because I think he felt slightly guilty at pushing me toward this conclusion. So from that point, I became a bit more open about what my beliefs were. He then asked me to write down all the various points I'd given to him, so he could take it back to a learned scholar in Pakistan. And so I did. I don't think he expected me to follow it through, but I sent him a big, long 10 A4 page letter. And it had all the various arguments in there. And I wasn't genuinely interested to see his response. I copied in all my siblings, and it's been 8 years, and I never did hear back from him. But that did begin the process of my activism, because I wanted,
So did anyone try and change your mind on a scholastic level?
Oh, of course, yes. A lot of people did. But what I found was a lot of people had their own views on Islam, but not a lot of people had actually done in-depth research. Anecdotally, I'd say, probably less than 20% of Muslims have actually read the Quran in a language that they understand from cover to cover, which I think is very sad, because they spend their entire lives devoted to it, but very few people have a clear understanding of what Islam really is to them. And so, like I say, I wrote that letter to him, didn't hear back from him, but it began my activism, and I developed the various points, and it was that which, and as I expanded on it, is that my book came out from.
Okay, well, we'll talk about your book in a little bit. We'll come back definitely and speak to you. So, a text come in just saying, I believe in God, but not religion. Having said that, I do go to the Sikh Gurdwaras. I believe it's God's house, just like a church Monday, etc. And I do seva there. I believe as long as I do good in my life, I don't need humans telling me what to do. Interesting. Ami said, I was born in an Asian religion, but converted to Christianity, became a deacon at the church, and then 7 years later realised how foolish I'd been. Now I've gone back to my birth religion and urge those who convert to research their own faith before they make the same mistakes as me. Wow, that's a fascinating story right there. Tell me, I would like to hear from you. Have you changed your faith? Have you abandoned the faith of your birth? And how did that play out in your family? Be interesting to know. 81869 is the text number. I'm here with Saif Rahman, and we're going to be talking about his book in a minute. He was born a Muslim into a devout Muslim family, but he changed. He no longer wished to be one. What do you think of that? Give us a call. 08459 440 445 is the number. Aftab is in London. We'll speak to Aftab after Mahi ve Mahi. Let's speak to Aftab in London, and the reason we're speaking to Aftab is because now we're talking about changing your faith and what kind of problems come with rejecting the faith of your birth. Aftab, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you, Nihal. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for reaching out to us today, Aftab. Why did you?
Well, I think the ultimate reason was my sexuality, to be honest. I'm a gay man, and it's taken me, 13 years to accept who I am. But I've known since I'm 33 now, so actually it's probably taken me 23 years. Because I knew when I was as young as a grasshopper, I knew when I was 11. It took me 10 years of believing in my faith, which I still believe in essentially. I still believe in the virtues of Islam. I think it's a peaceful, loving, caring religion. And I think if you're a decent, good person, I think you're naturally Islamic, or naturally any of the religions that are the most dominant religions out there. I think if you follow the virtues of those religions, you become a good person. And I think ultimately my reason for not necessarily walking away from it in its entirety, but walking away from it as in the mainstream way of what people believe in Islam, is because it created a lot of problems. I think if my father and my mother were atheists, or my brothers and sisters, I think I would have had a lot easier a ride. And it was ultimately because of religion that they had these biases. And every time I tried to sit down and talk to them about it, they hid on what it was. I felt like they were hiding behind their faith, as opposed to like opening their minds up and thinking about just a human situation that I was as a human being being rejected by and being accepted for, or not being accepted for, as the case may be.
Did you feel? Sorry, Aftab. Did you feel then that your sexuality prohibited you from being a Muslim?
I think it didn't prohibit me from being a Muslim, because when I read on my own, when I read Islam is all it's in the eye of the beholder, and even when you pray, when you read the namaz, it's your niyat that's accountable, it's your intention. And no other person can judge you apart from God in Islam. No one can judge your religion, your sort of dedication to Islam, bar God. He's the only person, if you want to call him, I'm not anthropomorphizing, but he's the only person, so to speak, that can make a judgment on whether you're a good Muslim or not. So based on that, I think if we really did follow our religions to the extent that we think we do, I think we'd live and let live. I think one of the virtues of Islam is to live and let live, and God will be the judge. He guides us. He doesn't dictate to us. And I think that's what happened to me ultimately.
But you still consider yourself to be a Muslim, don't you?
In essence, yeah, I do, because I believe in all the rights of Islam, and I think it's a beautiful religion. And I think is it Saif Rahman who was speaking to you earlier, and he was put in a position where he had to make a decision whether if he either did or he didn't. Well, like I said, no one can put you in that position, bar God. And that's why Islam is, you can't, I think people do pick and choose, and you'll hear lots of scholars and people go, oh, you can't pick and choose, but actually it's how you interpret your faith. For me, I lost a lot because of my religion, so I naturally had to move away from it, so I didn't have a choice.
Do you have any relationship with your family anymore?
To a point, I do. Yeah, it's like, let's not talk about it, and it's fine. But I'm a human being. I'd love to talk about it.
Do you still walk into a mosque?
Yeah, I still walk into a mosque with my head held high, because I believe that God's doors open for everyone, every race, every creed, every type of human being. So I'm one of His human beings in my eyes. Okay,
Aftab, can I just leave it there for a second, Saif? Listening to Aftab as a gay man saying, I still consider myself to be a Muslim, why could you not reconcile those differences? I'm not saying that you're gay, I'm just saying that you couldn't reconcile the homophobia that you feel exists in the religion.
Well, I think what he's done there is done something that I think is great. He's interpreting Islam through a humanistic prism. So he isn't, relying upon, the ancient scholars or the people that we have deemed to be experts on the religion themselves. He's interpreting it for himself. And I think that is something that I do want to push for. I love Sufistic belief. I think it's great. I think it makes good human beings. One ex-Muslim I actually heard say, and I thought it was very clever, he said to his wife, I can give up God, I can give up religion, but I can't give up Sufi music. And so, what he's saying is that, there are great things within religion itself. So I think you can, take the best bits, but we've got to be careful from taking these things too literally, because you get people like Aftab who've unfortunately suffered the backhand of with his family, and the negative consequences that you get within our community if you are homosexual or have various other things that aren't deemed good within Islam, whereas within today's society there's no problem with them.
Okay, well let's Aftab, if you can stay with us for a little while. Ayan has just got on the line, called in from Birmingham. Ayan, good morning.
Good morning, how are you doing? You all right?
I'm good, mate, I'm good. What do you think of the conversation that we're currently having about changing your religion?
My argument, first of all, was basically there's no tradition in Islam and there's no culture. And then the other thing is, how can you deny your own parents' upbringing for something as stupid as that? Stupid as that?
As stupid as what? Sorry, Ayan, as what?
Writing a book. The first chapter, because the guy that was on first.
Yes.
Basically, he was talking about how there's a tradition in Islam and culture in Islam. Well, there isn't any tradition or any culture whatsoever.
But culture does creep in, doesn't it, Ayan, in the way people interpret certain things?
If you're a true Muslim, I think it comes from Saudi Arabia.
Sorry, if you're a true Muslim...
It mainly comes... After practicing properly 5 times a day, it comes from countries like Saudi Arabia. But if you're cultural, it comes from other countries. They're talking about culture, talking about parampara and things like that, which is completely going off the track. And the other thing he referred to... writing a book about it, and he was very clear in what he was explaining about in the book. So where did he go about writing a book about it?
Okay, Saif, I'm just trying to figure this out. Why have you wrote a book, and what is the book about? Which is a good chance. Ayan, stay with us. Why did you decide to write the book?
Because, like I said, I went through a big period of feeling upset and feeling lonely because I didn't know many people at the time who shared the same views as I had. And I wanted something out there to help people who were going through the same transition that I was as a teenager, with something that was objective, something that had already, somebody had already written, without any bias towards Islam or any bias against Islam, just something that, was filled with a rational analysis, behind the scientific miracle claims, behind its philosophical claims, and various other socio-cultural context claims that it made. I don't think we have that within our community because often anybody who's not on message is often nudged out from the scene. So certain people can push their own versions and interpretations of Islam, and that's bad.
Okay, Aftab, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something else, really. It's just, obviously, one of the reasons as well, one of the reasons why I ended up sort of making the decision that I did was because my partner, who I've been with for nearly, 15 years now, 13 years, his family are atheists, and they're Catholic, the Church of England, but they're atheists as such now. And I found that because of their not believing so intensely in a religion, it felt like he has a life, he has family that love him and care him unconditionally. There's no conditions. And I think for me, it opened my eyes up. I was like, God, because of my religion, I've been denied my mother's love from here onwards, or my father's support, mental, physical, whatever. And I found that, hang on a minute, because in the name of religion, you sort of denounce your own flesh and blood. And for me, that just didn't sit right, especially in Islam, it didn't sit right. And I think that when you have conditional love on your children in the name of religion, I find that really hard to sort of square. I find it really hard to sort of make sense to me, especially when I see what's being denied and what actually could be achieved by putting that to one side and loving someone for whoever they are and whatever they are. I think religion has too many rules, and my own personal, the way I ended up dealing with it in a really simplified form was, I personally believe to an extent that religion was a very early form of sort of social rules and regulations as such. I think we live in a world today where we can make our own minds up as long as we're not hurting thy neighbour and sort of being good people.
But you see, but where does that come from, After? It came from religion, didn't it? Thou shalt not kill, love thy neighbour. These came from religion. The laws that you take for granted.
Before I hang up.
Ian, go on.
Basically, the first person called who's organised the book.
Yes.
A bit more about the culture and not religion.
You think he's talking about the culture and not the religion?
Yeah.
But the religion itself, but Ian, the religion itself does not condone homosexuality at all, does it?
I understand that. But I'm saying his book should have been about his culture only, and not mixing the religion into it.
But Ian, if he, they say there's no compulsion in religion, don't they? Right? Yeah. So that means you can't be forced into it. Now, if he's done the research, if he's looked into it and said that's not for me, then what's the problem with that?
I still like the idea of him mixing religion and culture together.
But you can't. How can you separate the two, Ian?
You either go one way or you go the other way, don't you, really?
Well, there's a different... Arabs have a different way...
Yeah.
Of practicing Islam than say Pakistanis do.
Little things into it, they stay on one frame of mind. Whereas other people are all confused, like the book writer, obviously.
But why do you think he's confused?
He seems very confused on his phone.
But why? He's been very clear.
It just seems to me he seems very confused what he's been writing in his book.
To be honest, I actually agree with Ayan. I think what he's saying about the belief itself is... something that I had a problem with, but he's not unique or different from a lot of people, and the way he thinks is very commonplace.
But he's saying that you're confused, but presumably you went through the confusion and you made a decision. Because if you were confused, you'd probably be still a Muslim, wouldn't you? and yet still trying to search for the truth within Islam, but you didn't.
Don't mix the culture aspect into the religion, is what we're saying.
Yeah, what he's saying is that there's a particular interpretation of Islam. It's not something that you can bring within, like I said, within a humanistic framework. There's a certain set criteria that you are and the way you are supposed to behave. It's quite clearly written, and it's quite clearly dictated by God himself.
Okay, Ayan, thank you very much indeed. Thanks. And Aftab, thank you very much as well for sharing it with us. How does Islam not give women rights when Islam says heaven is under your mum's feet, says someone, anonymous texter? Samina said, I grew up in a strict Muslim and foremost strict cultural Pakistani family. There's been passed on a lot of fear to us, mostly fear for God. Now you know how the Catholics feel. Around the age of 18, don't look shocked, Bill. Catholics are always feeling guilty about something or another, aren't they? I thought it's all based on guilt. It's, oh no, I'm not worthy. Oh no, did I do that? Oh no, I shouldn't have been doing that. Okay, around the age of 18, I went on a spiritual journey to find myself more connected with God. I wore a veil and prayed 5 times a day, although I found that I liked pleasing my parents and society more than the teachings. I tried to read lots of books and due to some personal circumstances found myself far away from my family. I think religion is man-made. There are several quotes in the Holy Book that are with contradictions. The rights of women are also not as is screamed out. Religion just creates barriers between people. It is all about power over people. It is all black and white. You are either in or out. Jews have Saturday as holy day, Christians Sunday, so the Muslims came with Friday. I know that there is more out there than science alone, but I do not like the dogmatic aspect of religion. I do miss the gatherings at Eid and other stuff, but I cannot go back to being a sheep again. Peace I find connecting with other people. If I do good, good will come to me. That's my religion. That's well, that sounds a little bit like you should be heading towards Hinduism, Sikhism and Jainism then, and Buddhism, if you believe, because that's essentially what karma is about, isn't it? Anonymous said, my wife's brother-in-law converted from Hinduism to Islam and then told his wife over a telephone conversation. Eventually, she also converted to Islam. We didn't find out for a good 5 to 6 years, but the rest of the family knew but kept it from us. The newly Muslim converts have been disowned by the whole family since this is classed as the biggest crime in religion. People who convert have no self-belief and jump from pillow and post to find their path. But what they don't realise is that their path is drawn at birth. I don't trust people who convert religions. You can only be born with a religion. I no longer have a relationship with my sister-in-law and her husband. I don't want to know them. Similarly, some of the family feel the same. My wife's extended family and my family are all strong Hindu believers, but there's always a black sheep in the family. Now, you see, what the interesting thing about that is exactly what Aftab said about religions, about they ask you to choose. Safe. I mean, that completely crystallised. They've disowned their own flesh and blood because they wanted to believe in something else.
Yeah,
as if that was the biggest crime in humanity.
It's sad, and I think it all boils down to this them versus us mentality. It's the in clique group versus the outsiders, and I think it does create that kind of differential between one human being to another, which in today's day and age I'd like to do without. I'd like to think we all just belong to one common humanity, and that's a global one.
My wife was a Christian and converted to Islam, says a texter. Roshni said, I converted from Christianity to Islam 16 years ago. I caused outrage and heartache in my family, and things only began to reconcile around 2 years ago. I do have a lot of respect for your guests. I think letting go of religion can be as brave or as hard as holding on to it. Islam says there is no compulsion in religion, each to their own, and I wish Saif peace and all the best. That's from Roshni. But also Islam is quite clear on apostasy, isn't it, Saif? It does say there's no compulsion in religion, but apostasy is pretty high up there in the list of things that it's not a fan of, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's something that people can argue the toss over. But again, if you're following a traditional version of Islam, I mean, I was traditionally brought up with Deobandi version of Islam. So yeah, lots of these things are clear, and there are certain hadith which you accept as 100% authentic. For example, Sahih Muslim and Sahih Bukhari, and in there, in Sahih Bukhari itself, it does say if a Muslim leaves his religion, kill him. There's, you can interpret that whichever way you want, but it's not very ambiguous, that though, is it? And so and people now are questioning the hadith, and that's something that's just happened in the past 5 to 10 years. prior to that, there was quite a clear understanding of exactly what was Islam and what wasn't Islam. And a lot of that, to be fair, was brought, from the Wahhabi petrodollars that came across in the 70s.
And still continue to come over to this day.
And funding that particular interpretation.
Okay, very quickly, where can people find out more about you online?
You could just Google Saif Rahman, SAIFRAHMAN, and you can see various articles that I've written, and take a look at my book if you like. Join our groups, join the Humanist and Cultural Muslim Association. That's something that I'd really like people to join in, so we can bring a mass movement pushing for a modern...
We've run out of time, Saif, sorry.
Great.
Sound of Asian Britain, on digital TV, online and on your mobile. This is BBC Asian Network.
Thank you to Saif Rahman.